Okay, welcome everyone. Wow, what an incredible turnout for this wonderful event this evening. I am so happy. Thank you so much for joining us and for your support of Telfair Museums. My name is Elise Gerstenecker, and I am the Director of Curatorial Affairs and Curator of Decorative Arts at Telfair Museums. And I am thrilled that we are opening Impressionism and Modernity, French and American Painting, in celebration of our 140th anniversary. Telfair Museums opened to the public as the first public art museum in the American Southeast on May 3rd, 1886. So this is a fitting birthday celebration for us, and no birthday celebration would be complete without cake. So at the end of the evening, you're more than welcome to come have some birthday cake in the atrium, because we must have that. This exhibition is a perfect way to celebrate Telfair's ongoing commitment to bringing the art of the world to Savannah, telling the story of Savannah and the greater coastal empire's own artistic and cultural heritage, and being a critical home for learning and exploration in our city. Before I introduce tonight's esteemed speaker, I would like to thank some very important people who helped bring everything together for this exhibition and this evening. So first, Haley S. Pierce and Dr. David Brenneman, who co-curated this exhibition from the collections of the National Gallery of Art and Telfair Museums. I would also like to thank our fantastic and it's seemingly inexhaustible curatorial team, which includes Heath Rich and Stephen Harmon, who are our chief preparator and exhibition designers, respectively, our current associate registrar, Marquisa Kulesser, our Rights and Reproduction Assistant Registrar, who was critical for a few key matters for this exhibition, Beth Moore, and then my peer curators, Erin Dunn, Amari Williams-Alford, and Harry DeLorme, who offered wonderful support and peer review, as well as Uriah Monk for all of his graphic design, and Ryan Cox for all of his work on our social media. And then for this evening's event, Carly Gagne and Claudine Scheichler. There are many, many more individuals who I should name, but these are people who are wonderful additions to our staff and who've been critical to making this evening happen. So tonight, we are honored to have Dr. Mary Morton, head of French painting at the National Gallery of Art, giving this talk. Dr. Morton has organized numerous important exhibitions of French Impressionism at the National Gallery, including Paris 1874, the Impressionist moment, Gustave Caillebotte, the painter's eye, and Gauguin, maker of myth. Prior to joining the National Gallery, she served as Associate Curator of Paintings at the J. Paul Getty Museum and Associate Curator of European Art at the Museum of Fine Arts, Houston. In addition to her curatorial work, she has published widely in her field and taught at several colleges and universities. In 2018, France's Ministry of Culture awarded her the Chevalier of the Order of Arts and Letters. She holds a She holds a PhD from Brown University and a BA in history from Stanford. Please give a warm welcome to Dr. Mary Morton.
Thank you, Elise. Yes, I want to start by thanking Elise Gerstenecker. Did I do that right? Yes. And of course, Haley Pierce for such a beautiful installation. How many of you have seen the show already, just to get a sense? Okay, so about a third of you. My gosh, it's just gorgeous. It could not be more beautiful. This project was proposed maybe a couple of years ago by David Brenneman when he arrived at Telfair. And I think he had it in mind all this time. Part of it just sort of thinking about the French connection between the Telfair's collection and the collection of French paintings at the National Gallery. And also specifically to celebrate the 140th anniversary of this museum. I mean, my gosh, the oldest museum in the South. It's amazing. So I am going to talk a little bit about Impressionism and modernity, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the show that we did last year called Paris 1874, and then I did get a chance to spend some time with the pictures this afternoon, and I just want to make a few notes to kind of hopefully ratchet up your appreciation and engagement with these pictures. That will be easy for you to do, but I might just make some observations. The French connection between the Telfair and actually the National Gallery. This actually sort of surprised me. Gary Melchers, who's not an artist that I'm terribly familiar with, I do French painting. And Gary Melchers is an American painter. We were very siloed in my world. But he was, as you know, the museum's artistic director from 1906 to 1916. And then he continued to be an art consultant for the Telfair for another decade or longer, helping them specifically with acquisitions as an art advisor. After his formal Telfair term, he became the chairman of the Smithsonian Committee to create a national gallery. This is the effort that concluded in the Smithsonian American Art Museum. And he was on the board of the Corcoran Museum of Art, which, if you don't know about that museum in Washington, D.C., it is the oldest art museum in D.C., founded by William Corcoran to share his art collection with the people of D.C. It sadly, as an institution, passed away in 2014, and the National Gallery happily took the objects from the collection that we could continue to exhibit and share with the people, which was William Corcoran's mandate, and that included this amazing portrait of Andrew Mellon. Now, Andrew Mellon would have just been, in 1930, starting to think about the National Gallery. He was inspired by the National Gallery in London. He had been appointed to the court of St. James. He would be in the succeeding years, and he really had that museum in mind when he created the idea for the National Gallery, which really broke ground and was given to the people in 1937, and then it opened in 1941. When the Telfair was founded in 1886, Gary Melchers was in Paris studying as an art student. He had arrived in 1881, and he began study at the École des Beaux-Arts, which was the great art school in the Western world. You really couldn't be a serious, ambitious artist without trying to get into and study at the École des Beaux-Arts. It was considered the training ground. He also took lessons at a private academy called the Académie Julian, and that is going to be an important sort of nexus for some of the pictures that we will continue to talk about. It was an independent, crucial alternative to the École des Beaux-Arts. It was founded in 1867-68 by Adolphe Julien. And it was not only a place where you could train, women were allowed to take classes there, but it was also a great place to meet other artists who were also interested in advancing painting in particular. So Gary Melchers met at the Académie Julian, many of the French and American artists that he would patronize as a Telfair advisor, including Félix Vallotton, this wonderful artist who in the 1890s would join a kind of mystical group called the Nabis. Bonnard and Vuillard were members of that group. Here he's painting a profile of Gary Melchers, and you'll see, particularly when you see it in the flesh, this painting, that he's mixed some kind of metallic paint, possibly some gold, into the ground. And so that profile has a kind of fascinating iridescence. And I hope the light, I don't know if you can take the light down a little bit on the podium. I just want to make sure that these paintings are popping. Now, when Melchers arrives in Paris, 1881, he sets to work absorbing the styles of the moment. He does not become an impressionist right away, and he practices in a style known as naturalism with a capital N. It was the sort of contemporary style, a very kind of meticulous representational style that focused on rural life, and he really fell in love with remote provinces of northern France. So you see him here painting a work called The Letter, and he submits that to the Salon jury, which we're going to talk about in a second, in 1886, and it is accepted. at the time, there was, in the 1880s, a major shift underway in the Parisian art world. In the 1880s, the art system was largely still organized by the state, by the nation, as it had been for 200 years, dating back to Louis XIV, who recognized the utility of the visual arts in the expansion and maintenance of his imperial power. It became a great source of national, not to say imperial pride, French art, French visual arts and architecture and decorative arts. And Louis XIV, of course, was the one that established the French Academy and the very stringent art training program, as well as a regular exhibitions program in the city of Paris, the annual state organized exhibition known as the Salon with a capital S. It was the only way to advance as an artist, to submit your work and gain acceptance from the Salon jury, and get a space on the wall, get written about, become known, sell your work. In the 1870s and 80s, this government-backed structure was beginning to break down. And I'm showing you a slide of a moment that we featured last year. We celebrated the 150th anniversary of the first Impressionist exhibition, which opened in April of 1874. And I'm showing you what we did in the exhibition was we pitted the official works from the Salon, a very select group, against what was actually in that first Impressionist show, just to show the visitor what was at stake, what the sort of tensions between these poles were. And I'm just showing you the Palais de l'Industrie, where the annual Salon exhibition took place on the Champs-Élysées. Some 3,700 works of art were hung in the Palais de l'Industrie by almost more than 2,700 artists. So really jam-packed. And these were artists that weren't just French, they were from around the world. Because again, it was the only way to become a great artist and get your name in lights was to get into the Salon. A few miles away were the sort of breakout group band of the artists who would become known as the Impressionists. At the time, they called themselves the Independents. And they rented an apartment. It was actually part of and including a photographer's studio. This was actually the most famous photographer of the day. His name was Nadar. And you can see his name literally in neon lights, not neon, but they were gaslit. This was a commercial space, and what these artists were trying to do was get their work out to the public. They had been fed up by the constrictive, conservative nature of the jury. They wanted to show their work, they wanted to control the way that their work was exhibited, and they wanted to sell their work. So this location was actually right in the American Quarter. It's where the banks were, it still is, and right around the corner from a lot of the very favorite shopping sites and banks and hotels that Americans tended to frequent. The sort of one of the great works from this exhibition was Monet's Boulevard des Capucines. This is a painting that lives at the Nelson Atkins Museum in Kansas City. This painting is a view from the window of Nadar's studio. So Monet had set up his easel, and he's looking down on what you would have seen when you were standing in that Impressionist show. And what you are seeing is a brand new boulevard. In fact, everything that you see within that painting was brand new. The boulevard, the sidewalk, those trees are not yet mature. The kiosks, which were known at the time as street furniture that line the street. The buildings, which were designed and known pervasively as Haussmannian buildings after the Alsatian prefect Baron Haussmann, who designed the new Paris. So in 1874, the city of Paris had undergone a radical urban renewal program that lasted about 22 years. And so it is basically finished by 1874. The idea was to open up the city, an essentially sort of medieval city of stitched together little villages, and what Baron Haussmann did was blast through those little villages, these long linear boulevards, clean open spaces, and then create a designed facade for those new boulevards that was uniform. Clean it up and just make it neat and create a space for the people of Paris to sort of enjoy themselves in public, which would have been, was just not the nature of Parisian life prior to this moment of modernity. And so what you see here Monet doing is actually, he probably spent a couple of, maybe a week or two or three painting this picture, but it looks like it was painted quickly in one shot. He uses a very broken brushwork to make it look like it's a sketch. That is an aesthetic that he will cultivate and that will become central to Impressionism, which is to say a painting that looks like a snapshot, quickly recorded, but of course that's just part of the aesthetic. And critics went crazy. They particularly were offended in a way by the way that the people are described. They referred to them as if a cat had licked black paint and then walked over the canvas and lapped up the boulevard. This wonderful little group of balloons, and just a sense of energy and flux and modernity. This is the idea of really what painting was supposed to be about in the 1870s and 80s. There is one poet that we tend to lean on who codifies this new aesthetic called Charles Baudelaire, and he wrote an essay that was republished in 1868 called The Painter of Modern Life. And he's basically saying, and let me switch to this wonderful slide, what Baudelaire says is, okay, contemporary artists, stop looking to the past, stop looking to ancient mythology and the Bible and French history for your subjects. What we need is for artists to represent what we're experiencing, which is extraordinary, the acceleration of time and space, this kind of intense sense of vibration and energy. We need artists to process that for us. We need modern art. What I'm showing you here was my favorite moment of the Washington, D.C. installation of Paris 1874. That was an exhibition that we shared with the Musée d'Orsay, and they preceded our venue. It was much more brilliantly installed at the National Gallery of Art. I do love the Musée d'Orsay, but it was really coherent and powerful. When the visitor arrived into the exhibition, this is what they saw. The painting on the left is by an artist called Jean-Léon Gérôme, who actually was one of the great art teachers of the day. So many American artists went and studied with him, including in the 1860s Akins and Mary Cassatt. And he was considered to be the greatest artist of the moment. And so he submitted this painting to the Salon jury of 1874. It was accepted, and it was the gold medal winning painting. It is a picture, it's called L'Éminence Grise. It's a painting from the history of Louis XIII's court life. What it is showing you, it is a story. It is, you could call it anecdotal, but it is about an august moment in French history. And it's showing you this monk who's called Père Joseph. He was a Capuchin monk. And courtiers in the palace of Cardinal Richelieu, who was the most powerful cardinal of the day. And Richelieu's advisor was this Capuchin monk, the man who sort of whispered into Richelieu's ears advice on what kinds of policies to construct. So this man is arguably, next to Cardinal Richelieu, one of the most powerful men in France. And it's such a great description of court life. You have all of these floridly dressed courtiers bowing and scraping to this power. And what is he doing in the ultimate power move? He's absorbed in his breviary. He's not paying attention to any of them. But the way that the composition is orchestrated, the architecture, the light coming through a clerestory window and hitting the front step, it's really got a kind of almost cinematic effect. And again, it won the gold medal. It was sold that year for 600,000 French francs to actually an American collector. And this is the epitome of great French painting in the Academy at the Salon. This painting, Claude Monet's Impression Sunrise, was hanging at Nadar's studio. This painting, compared to the Gérôme, is just a mess. It's just a little sketch of a boat in a foggy, smoggy harbor in Le Havre on the northern coast. It looks like it was done in less than an hour. And it really doesn't look like it is presentable as an exhibition piece, according to the critics. They were insulted that someone would sign a picture like this and proffer it for public consumption, which is what Monet does. It's, of course, a very beautiful painting. We are now completely absorbed and consumed by the Impressionist aesthetic. So if you all were to choose between these two pictures, it would be interesting to know which one you would choose to take home. This painting, I can't even tell you what the insurance value on this picture now is. The poor Nelson, I'm sorry, this painting, I can't even think. Yeah, the relative insurance values right now would be completely lopsided from what they were in 1874. This picture belongs to the Musée Marmottin in the 16th arrondissement, and it is their treasure. So the curators of the show really had to sort of give each of us a pound of flesh in order to get it as a loan, but it was celebrated and marvelous. But I hope it sort of sets up the launch of some of the values behind Impressionism: immediacy, contemporaneity, presence, spontaneity. So let's delve into what I would like to do is just talk a little bit about these beautiful paintings that are upstairs, just some thoughts about them. And again, Gary Melcher is responsible for most of the pictures that are upstairs. There are some gifts from others, and then there are 5 loans from the National Gallery. But these 2 drawings by James Tissot, and as I speak, it might be helpful to just keep in mind some of these modernist principles. As I said, the turn to the contemporary, the present day, in some cases the present moment, an emphasis on individual expression as opposed to just performing a highly trained practice. Also a kind of common language. Impressionism was very much a group movement. Artists feeding off of one another, advancing the field in communally validated ways. That's happening certainly in France, among the Impressionist cohort, and then it moves over to America, which we'll talk about in a second. Chronologically, the earliest of the objects upstairs is this drawing here, my favorite of the 2 Tissot drawings. And I just loved studying this afternoon. This is a young woman, beautifully appareled. James Tissot is an interesting artist. He is absolutely one of the group of avant-gardists in the 1860s and a very close friend of Edgar Degas. And he is a realist. He and Degas are realists. They are committed to transcribing the reality of modern life. Tissot in particular loved fashion, and he loved looking and sort of studying almost anthropologically young women. And so in this case, he's got this woman. This is for a painting that unfortunately is lost, but there is an engraving that Haley has reproduced, that the museum has reproduced on the wall text upstairs of what that painting looked like. And it shows 2 young women, again, in London, beautifully appareled, looking at a shipyard near the Seine. And she's looking actually a little bit bored, looking at you askew. And when you get upstairs, pay attention to this other little detail that he records on the sheet. It's a different positioning of her fingers, and they're sort of like moving into her mouth. I mean, he's really fascinated by her and her look and her attitude. And what she has, too, which is rather striking, is a sense of subjectivity. I mean, she's somebody, and she's got real sort of she's got attitude. It's really kind of wonderful. A slightly more faded drawing, but a marvelous image of a young woman with binoculars. And the degree to which modernity depended on what you could call the spectacle and the spectacular, and people just looking, I mean, Paris blown up into a public site for the performance of leisure and life, and everybody, I mean, it's still the case when you go to Paris, everybody's looking at everybody. This sort of starts in this modern moment. And so to sort of thematize looking, you will see in some of the other images as well. A very small little panel from the National Gallery by Degas. Strange little picture. He is a very strange artist. I have finally decided, having spent my career with him, he's not actually that interested in, ultimately, a finished product. Degas loves to make art, and he's just fascinated by the process of art making, print making, pastel making, painting. And in this case, I am feeling that he was obsessed with the ballet, and he used to take a sketchbook, and I think he might have taken some oil paints to the opera house. He used to go several times a week. Charles Garnier's Palais Garnier, the great opera house of Paris, which still stands, was constructed around the concept of public spectacle. People went, they went regularly. Not too many people actually paid attention to what went on the stage, which was usually a concert, always with a little ballet, but it was really, the activity was really happening in the balcony boxes and on the orchestra floor and on the grand staircase as you enter. So I was studying this little panel today. You've got the ballerina down here and two women. What I love, this is classic Degas, is this rather menacing, dark form to the right, which I have decided is a gentleman, a large gentleman, and it's sort of the silhouette of his suit. And Degas often does this. He's fascinated by ballerinas in the ballet, these highly trained athletes, but he's often portraying them in sort of off moments. And he was also very interested in the dark side of the ballet and the ballet house, and the fact that these young ballerinas were generally working class girls, and there was a real sort of, it was a great opportunity for predators and for, they were called ballet subscribers, but they were gentlemen who would gain access to the behind the stage, and they would pay a fee, and they would sort of adopt one of these girls who certainly could use the support. And so there was, Degas always looking around the edge of the pretty and, trying to show, he is the great artist, I think, of the dark side of the 19th century. I've always wanted to do an exhibition called Degas, the Dark Side. I would never get, it's never gonna happen. Much better to do Degas and the dance, or Degas ballerinas, but, we'll see. One of Degas' best friends was this guy, Forain, Jean-Louis Forain. He's not terribly well known, but very much a follower and a sort of collaborator with Degas. And this is one of the wonderful objects upstairs. It comes from the National Gallery. I haven't spent time with it for quite a while. It is an image of the horse races. So I think next to the ballet, for an outdoor leisure pursuit, horse racing was all the rage in the time of Impressionism. This is 1890s, so 1870s, 80s, and 90s. Horse racing, the leisure time pursuit imported from the UK, very fashionable. An opportunity, as it still is, to dress up in your finery, go out for an exciting moment, but mostly about people looking at people, and that is what Forain is interested in. So the race is happening over here. This young woman is paying attention. She's standing up probably on some kind of box. This gentleman is entirely attentive to her. He's watching her. This guy's reading his racing form. There's a lot of little tickets that have been torn and tossed on the ground. Who knows who he's looking at? The furniture is all sort of disheveled. The conceit here is a snapshot of real life. And so you haven't composed everybody very nicely. He's trying to convey this moment of modernity. One of the things that we discovered in Paris 1874 was the breadth of genres that were actually present among the 200 objects that were in that first Impressionist show. When you think of Impressionism, you think of landscape painting. You think of it as a landscape movement. That was actually not historically the case. Most of the Impressionist exhibitions, there were 8 between 1874 and 1886, consisted of other kinds of genre. So Impressionism as a landscape movement was actually packaged and marketed by one dealer in particular. His name is Paul Durand-Ruel, and he was the great dealer of Impressionism, and he recognized early on that there was going to be a robust market for beautiful, colorful landscape paintings on the part of Americans that were French, and particularly his star artist was Monet, Claude Monet. These are beautiful paintings, colorful. They don't require classical education to understand, or a knowledge of French history, or even mythology or the Bible. They're just wonderfully consumable. And so, most of the paintings upstairs are landscape paintings. And this painting should probably remind you of a work by Claude Monet. It is by Gary Melchers. The garden motif equals Monet. I mean, if you think about Monet, you think about Giverny, you think about the water lilies and the Japanese footbridge. A private, domestic sphere entirely controlled, in Monet's case certainly, as opposed to being out in a forest or on the coast. You could sort of control the environment for light and color. And what Melchers is really interested in here is color and sunshine. This is, and the last time you saw Melchers, by the way, 1886, it was those two northern French girls opening up a letter in a very different style. So he has fully arrived at Impressionism by this point, 1903, 1905. A total convert. And what it shows you is his garden in his home in Holland, and his wife. His connection, by the way, I know you know this, but I wasn't fully aware until I was studying up for this talk. His connection to Savannah was his wife, Corinne, and I had her last name here, McCall, Corinne McCall. So he meets her actually in Europe. She's an art student, and he meets her in 1903 or 1904, and they decide to get married, so now he's connected to Savannah. She, of course, gives up her career to support his career. This is the nature of it. But she was herself an artist. This is her, and she's either sewing. I like to think of her as reading, because apparently she would sit in the garden while Gary painted and read aloud for hours at a time. And it's just such a wonderful kind of like cultural, aesthetic hothouse feel. The maid is tending to something, but it's a fantastic painting. It's very large. I spent quite a bit of time with it this afternoon. I believe it has never been varnished. It has a wonderful matte surface. It's in pristine condition, never been lined, and what it's really about is green and red, about the power of that complementary color chord, and touch and sunlight. It is just stunning. Also studying at the Académie Julienne with Gary Melchers and the others was Carl Frieseke. And he also summered in Giverny, where Monet was living. And that is the site of this painting. It's his garden just next door to Monet's garden. And this painting consists of every color on the palette. It's incredible, and the hots and the cools and everything in between, particularly the orange-red at the center. I mean, it's just a buzzing painting. You look at it close up, if you stand back, it's just absolutely as lively. Toning it down a little bit, Henry Twachtman, this painting from 1884-85, he had gone to Paris in 1883, and he studied at the Académie Julienne. So all of these guys are meeting there in Paris. And this is a small, very humble painting, but what a beautiful study. It is absolutely a study done en plein air, outside, of water and sky. And he's working quickly, because the light is going to change, so he has to come up with some sort of ingenious ways of applying the paint and recording what he's seeing fast. So there's nothing meticulous or linear in the description. Little bit of a Japanese aesthetic, maybe a kind of impressionist sort of reduction of complication and minimalization. But what he's able to do, because he's working fast and because he is Twachtman and he's on his way to becoming one of the great American landscape painters, is he's capturing atmosphere, this sense of humidity. It's a painting of kind of the emanation of sort of humid light as it advances towards your eye, this humid envelope. He's in Honfleur on the Channel Coast in the north. He would start a plein air painting summer school in Cascab in Greenwich, Connecticut, and he would bring together artists and help them get out. I mean, the whole idea is to get outside and just sort of lose any kind of academic bearings and just respond to what you're seeing. And that is inevitably going to be a very independent, individual kind of practice, and very lively. And it has become responsible for these extraordinary things. I think this is probably my biggest surprise. Haley, we were talking about this. I think it was a big surprise for you, the power of this painting by Edward Redfield. He was from New Hope, from Bucks County, Pennsylvania. He studied in Paris at the Académie Julian. In 1889, he also took classes at the École des Beaux-Arts. This painting was bought by Gary Melchers the year that it was painted. So this is the brilliance about having an artist be your art advisor. He had a purse from the museum, and he's going around and snapping up extraordinary examples of Impressionist painting, American and French. This is a large painting. It was an absolute revelation. When you look at this painting, there is so much of it that is painted what we call wet into wet. He's moving so fast that he's laying in strokes in parts of the canvas that haven't yet dried. And so the pigments, the colors are merging. And just his physical engagement with the viscous material expressively is just extraordinary. Not to mention the palette, which is very subtle. And I've always loved snow scenes, particularly Impressionist snow scenes, when you take someone who is really trained in color expression and has spent so much time painting outside that their eyes are sensitized to even the slightest nuance of shift in hue or tone, and you put them in a snowscape so that it limits the palette, but it stretches it into this incredibly sophisticated sort of quiet, array of notes. It's just fantastic. And I love, Haley, I think you guys put it right next to the Sisley, or it's one painting away. So Sisley, Alfred Sisley, who's one of the unsung greats of the French Impressionist movement, he had a big showing in 1874 at the first exhibition, and he continued to exhibit with the Impressionists. And I think Sisley's best work are his snowscapes, and he really responded. So you take this very quiet, nothing scene. There is nothing interesting about the subject here, the subject matter. If you were to write a paragraph on what this painting is about, you would have to defer immediately to color and try and find some words for what he's doing here. It is so subtle. It's the same, very similar palette to the Redfield. There are some wonderful little notes of pure magenta that appear sort of flecked around. But it's just a fantastic combination, sort of glowing. Everybody wants to have a Van Gogh painting in their show. And so we were able to share this picture, which is a really interesting Vincent van Gogh from 1883. Van Gogh's early work, as you may know, before he gets to Paris in 1886 and really absorbs Impressionism and then Post-Impressionism and comes alive to color, his early work from the early 1880s is quite dull and drab when he's in Holland. It's all browns and it's rural people. You think of the Potato Eaters, which is a brilliant painting, but there's no color in the Potato Eaters. And here's an opportunity. Here's a moment in 1883 where he did come alive to color. And he's painting a field of hyacinths. So it's kind of fun to have a kind of proto-post-impressionist Van Gogh picture. And brilliantly installed next to this picture by George Hitchcock, 1890, Spring in Holland. So no doubt Hitchcock is thinking about Van Gogh and certainly tulips and friends. Hitchcock was best friends and neighbors with Melchers in Holland. And this is a fantastic painting, a big painting, really sort of playing with these strips of color, which really kind of, almost in a decorative way, flatten out 3/4 of the composition. And then the longer you look, there is quite a bit of space that he contrives in the background to the right, these wonderful rhythmic trees, and then you have a little bit of an edifice to sort of ground you in this profusion of vibrating, sunlit, fresh flowers. It's an amazing thing. Willard Metcalf, who studied, where did he study in Paris? Yay, the Académie Julian, 1883, also spending summers in Giverny. So this sort of Académie Julian, this international little group, and then of course Monet becomes the great model for these guys, and they want to get as close to him. Monet sort of suffers their proximity and presence. He's developing his market, and Metcalfe is also out there. He would become one of the 10, which was the breakout group of American Impressionists from essentially the National Academy of Design, the sort of academic counterpoint to the Academy in France. And so that was Twachtman and Child Hassam, who we'll talk about in a second, and Willard Metcalfe. And this is a really beautiful picture. Very light touch versus the Redfield. It looks like it was probably done quickly, but the marks are similarly sort of lightly placed all over. And so this is a kind of image that comes at you sort of simultaneously, very subtle. And then he leaves quite a bit of canvas showing through so that it adds to the unity and to the sense of kind of sketchiness and informality. I love this Elliott Clark. I have never heard of Elliott Clark. Elliott Clark comes and teaches art in Savannah in 1924 and 25, and he falls in love with industrial sections of the city. Now, industrial images had always been a crucial part of modernism and of Impressionism. And there have been some projects on industrial Impressionism. They have tended not to be very popular, the books and the exhibitions on what happens when an Impressionist is painting smokestacks and dirty scenes. But if you think about Monet, particularly when he goes to London, which at the time that he's there in the 1890s is absolutely filthy. It's real smog. It's a combination of fog and smog, and Monet loved it. You saw the image of Le Havre that I showed you at the beginning from 1874. That is all about what smog does to light. Or if you've spent time in smoggy cities, I grew up in Los Angeles in the 70s, the sunsets are stunning. So if you're interested in what atmosphere does to color, smog and fog are going to be friends for you, and I think this is what excites Elliott Clark. It's Savannah. It's a scene of Savannah. And what I loved looking at this afternoon, beautiful reflections of light and descriptions of people and carts and rail tracks. And then when you get up into the actual smog part, it's as if he's mixed grit into the paint. It is literally gritty when you get into the sky. Raffaelli is another Impressionist that you may or may not have ever heard of. He was an Impressionist that, talk about the dark side, he was relentlessly focused on the dispossessed, the beggars, the drunks, the people that were not winners during this urban renewal project that I described under Haussmann. And here you have a work from Telfair, which does not reproduce very well, but when you see this in person, it's actually really fabulous. He's a wonderful draftsman, Raffaelli. He's able to convey so much with linear marks, and he's focused here on the industrial outskirts of Paris, Billancourt, which is still a very tough industrial part of Paris. And like Tissot and Forain, he was marginalized from the Central Impressionist group, and I would argue that this did have something to do with just the lack of marketability of images like this. If Durand-Ruel is trying to sell to Americans who want to decorate their dining rooms with pretty pictures, this is not going to get very far. On loan from the gallery is this object, which actually came from the Corcoran collection. And it's a wonderful image of a Parisian boulevard. There is a way in which to merely transcribe Parisian life was an act of modernism in art, because Paris was thought to be the capital of modernity, and Parisian life was in and of itself so modern. So you see here one of those Haussmannian streets, peopled by figures who are doing what Haussmann had planned for. Ladies dressed up, they're all shopping, they're very fashionable. Consumers moving around the cafes, the spectacle, the bustle. And cityscapes were always part of Impressionism, and I think were quite fascinating also to American Impressionists. So you have somebody like Childe Hassam taking the Impressionist language from France and very intentionally training it on American subjects. So this fantastic image of Fifth Avenue during World War I in 1917, the Avenue of the Allies, and the three allied flags, France, Great Britain, and the American flag. This is right in front of the Waldorf Astoria. And he considered his paintings of the flags on Fifth Avenue a series. And in fact, he exhibited 23 of these paintings as a series in Durer-Ruel's gallery in 1919. So if you're thinking about Monet's series, the haystacks, the poplars, the Rouen Cathedral, that's exactly where Hassam is coming from. And the man at the center of all of that serial production is Paul Durer-Ruel, the dealer. I mean, what a great marketing strategy to do series projects. You know, if you want that painting by Monet, there are 23 others just like it. And it was brilliant. It was totally brilliant. Aesthetically, they're also quite compelling. And if you think about the Boulevard des Capucines that we started with, and what Childe Hassam is doing here with the people and the cat tongue lickings. Also Childe Hassam, the Brooklyn Bridge. I mean, really an icon of New York City modernity at this moment. The Gothic form of the arches, almost like a Gothic cathedral. And in snow. This is a very soft, quiet, subtle painting, much like what it's like to stand even in a city when the snow is actively falling, very sort of muffled. But he gets some fantastic sort of opalescent values in here. And it too is extremely thinly painted. I am going to conclude with I think it probably is my show favorite. And I think we were talking about this earlier, a term for this painting as muscular. George Bellows, I mean, the great early American modernist, macho American modernist, and his machismo stretches not from, he's of course the great painter of boxing, but it also stretches to the way that he paints. And this is Riverside Park. He did a lot of paintings of Riverside Park. He used to walk around Riverside Park. He's not painting this en plein air. The great surprise for me coming to the show this afternoon is the scale of this picture, which Melchers bought. I forget the acquisition. I think it might have been the very year he made it. So Gary Melchers bought this. He knew George Bellows. He bought this painting in 1911 for Telfair. And it's huge. It's not as big as this projection, but it's about, well, it's a little bit less than half. And it is a snowscape. And what really captivated Bellows about New York City was the vitality and the energy, and he tried to correlate that with his facture. We call it facture, the way that you apply paint. There's a wonderful, the longer you look at this painting, you get a strong sense of the sort of internal geometry of the scene, but what is so fascinating is the handling. And he's using palette knives and rags, and he's turning his brush around and scraping it in the wet paint. It's just absolutely fantastic, and it's in perfect condition. It's never been lined, which is to say, you know, relined and smushed. It's just a revelation, this painting. So I know you're going to enjoy that. I hope that you will go up and find your favorite paintings and talk amongst yourselves. And claim some of them. The National Gallery paintings belong to you as tax-paying citizens of the United States of America. They belong to you. I'm glad that you can see them. You can't take them from the show, but they are yours, and we're taking good care of them, and I'm just so grateful that we were able to share them, and I'm so grateful to get some time with you this evening to talk about these wonderful pictures. Thank you very much.
I think they want to see the show. We do have time for questions, but I do see that a lot of you want to see the exhibition. So do we have any questions from the audience? No? Okay, go enjoy. Oh, yeah. Sylvia, you can come on down. I know who you are. Oh. Well, there's one. There's one.